The man had been standing outside her apartment building for 11 consecutive mornings. Not pacing, not checking his phone, just standing there, hands in his coat pockets, watching the entrance with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be, and every reason to stay. Amara Bennett saw him on the third morning and told herself he was waiting for a cab. On the fifth morning, she told herself he worked nearby. On the eighth morning, she stopped telling herself anything and started walking faster. By the 11th morning, she knew the truth that the police would later refuse to write down. Someone had chosen her. And they were not going to stop. If you were walking out of your front door tomorrow and saw the same stranger waiting again, what would you do? This is a story about a woman who asked a dangerous man to dance. She thought she was escaping a shadow. She had no idea she was stepping into the arms of the most feared man in Seoul. If this story already has you holding your breath, hit that like button right now, subscribe so you never miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The night Amara Bennett's life split cleanly into before and after did not announce itself. There was no dramatic music, no warning from the universe, no cold feeling on the back of her neck that something permanent was about to happen. There was only a 12-hour shift at Seoul General Hospital that had left her feet aching and her scrub smelling like antiseptic and old coffee, and the particular exhaustion that comes from spending an entire day keeping people from dying. She had done the job well. She almost always did. Amara had been in Seoul for 2 years, transferred through a global nursing exchange program that paired critical care specialists with hospitals in partner countries. She was 34, from Atlanta, and possessed the kind of clinical instincts that her supervisors described in performance reviews as almost frightening. She could read a deteriorating patient before the monitors caught it. She could hold a stranger's hand during the worst moment of their life and make them believe, genuinely believe, that things might still be okay. She was excellent at saving other people. She was considerably worse at reading what was happening to herself. That evening, she walked out of Seoul General's staff entrance at 11:43, her bag over one shoulder, her hospital ID still clipped to her scrub pocket. The street outside was quiet the way Seoul got quiet after midnight. Not empty, exactly, but thinned out. The usual density of the city reduced to a handful of people moving purposefully toward wherever they needed to be. Amara stopped at the corner to check her phone. A message from her mother in Atlanta asking if she'd eaten. She typed back a quick yes, which was technically true if coffee counted, and started walking toward the subway entrance 2 blocks east. She did not see the man in the dark coat standing beneath the scaffolding across the street. Or rather, she saw him the way you see something without registering it. A shape. A presence. Part of the background texture of a city at night. It was only 3 mornings later, standing at her apartment building's entrance, that she finally connected the shape to a face. And by then it was too late to pretend the shape was random. He was not a large man. That was the first thing that surprised her. She had constructed a monster in her mind, broad-shouldered and conspicuous, the kind of threat you could point to and have other people immediately confirm. But the man watching her building was average height, slim, wearing a dark coat that hit just below his knees. His face was partially obscured under the hood. He stood near the entrance of the convenience store across the street, not buying anything, not looking at his phone, just watching. Amara went back inside her building and stood in the lobby for 4 minutes, heart knocking against her ribs, before deciding she was overreacting. She was a black woman alone in a foreign country. She was already trained to be more alert than most. She was pattern-matching noise into threat. She went back outside. He was still there. She went to work. The first person she told was Ji Hye, a fellow nurse 2 years her junior who had adopted Amara with fierce, pragmatic affection from Amara's first week at Seoul General. Ji-hee was the kind of woman who solved problems with the brisk efficiency of someone who had no patience for problems that refused to be solved. "You're sure it's the same person?" Ji-hee asked, not looking up from the medication chart she was annotating. 3 mornings, same coat, same spot. Last night I think I saw him near the subway exit. Ji-hee looked up. "Did you get a photo?" "I tried. He moves before I can frame it, or turns away, like he knows when I'm about to look directly at him." Ji-hee put down her pen. "That last part is what's bothering me." It was bothering Amara too. Someone who randomly loitered near an apartment building did not have the instinct to turn at the exact moment a resident raised their phone. Someone who did that had been paying close enough attention to develop a sixth sense for her habits, her rhythms. The small behavioral tells of a person who didn't yet know she was being studied. Ji-hee encouraged her to file a report. Amara went to the local precinct that weekend, practiced her Korean carefully in her head on the subway ride over, and sat across from an officer who listened with an expression that she recognized immediately. She had seen that expression on the faces of patients' family members when she described a condition they did not want to acknowledge. It was the expression of someone deciding in real time how seriously to take you. The officer asked if the man had approached her. No. If he had made any verbal threats, no. If he had followed her into her apartment building or her workplace. Not that she could confirm. He asked if she had any photographs. She did not. He wrote something down. He gave her a case number that she could call with updates. He told her to contact them immediately if the situation escalated. She walked out of the precinct and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, with her hands in her coat pockets, and the very clear understanding that she was on her own. 3 weeks passed. The man in the dark coat did not stop. He appeared with a regularity that she slowly mapped, always near her apartment in the mornings, always a distance away but never far enough, occasionally visible near the hospital when she worked late shifts. He never came closer. He never spoke. He never made any gesture that would constitute a provable threat. He simply maintained a constant, patient presence at the outer edge of her life, and the effect was devastating. Amara started checking her windows before getting changed. She started varying her route to the subway, taking different exits, occasionally doubling back. She started sleeping badly, waking at small sounds, lying in the dark with her ears working overtime to parse the ordinary noises of her building from something that wasn't ordinary at all. She lost 4 pounds without trying. Ji-hee noticed and said nothing, which was worse than her saying something. The fear was not the explosive cinematic kind that comes from a sudden shock. It was quieter than that. It was the slow erosion of the feeling that she was safe inside her own life. The sense of invisible thread connecting her to something she could not identify, could not confront, and could not cut. She had treated patients living with prolonged stress and could describe clinically what it did to the human body, the cortisol spikes, the sleep disruption, the way chronic alertness burned through a person's reserves. She had explained it compassionately to patients and their families and felt genuine sorrow for what they were enduring. She had not expected to become the case study. It was Ji-hye who suggested Velvet Crown. "I know you don't go out on nights off," Ji-hye said during a break, sliding a coffee across the nurse's station counter. "But you haven't slept a real night in weeks, and you're going to make a medication error if you keep running on adrenaline and stubbornness. A few hours somewhere crowded. Real music, real people. Just exist somewhere that isn't your apartment or this hospital." "A nightclub," Amara said flatly. "A very good nightclub. I know the door staff. We won't wait in line." "I'm 34, Ji-hye." "So am I, and I need to dance. Come with me or I'll be forced to take someone boring." Amara almost said no. She could feel the shape of the no in her mouth, reasonable and self-protective. But she looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of her phone and recognized the woman looking back, contracted, careful, worn down into a smaller version of herself by weeks of quiet fear. She recognized that woman and did not want to be her anymore. "1 hour," Amara said. Ji-hye smiled. "Sure." Velvet Crown occupied the upper floors of a building in Gangnam that looked during daylight hours like an ordinary glass office tower. At night it became something else, a controlled world of low light and pulsing sound, private booths arranged along curved balconies that overlooked the main floor, the whole space designed to make you feel simultaneously hidden and watched, which was exactly the sensation Seoul's moneyed class apparently paid premium prices to experience. Amara felt it the moment they stepped inside. The crowd was the right density, enough people to disappear into. She let herself exhale for the first time in what felt like weeks, let the bass from the speakers sit in her chest and displace some of the tension she'd been carrying there. Ji-hee pulled her toward the bar. They got drinks. Ji-hee greeted someone she knew, fell into conversation, and Amara drifted a half step away and simply stood for a moment, just existing inside the noise and the warm crush of strangers, nobody watching her, nobody positioned at a precise distance with their hood turned up. She checked the time. 40 minutes until she'd allow herself to go home. She turned to get another drink and saw him. Not Jihe's crowded venue, not the gathered beautiful people of Gangnam on a Friday night, not the bartender reaching for a bottle. Him, the man in the dark coat. He was standing at the far edge of the room near one of the side exits, partially visible behind a cluster of people, and he was looking directly at her. No pretense this time, no strategic positioning that could be explained away. Just two eyes across a crowded room, locked onto her with the specific intentionality of someone who had followed her here and wanted her to know it. Amara's drink slipped in her hand. She steadied it. Her heart had done something wrong inside her chest, a kind of sideways lurch, and she felt the blood leave her face in a single cold wave. Her training kicked in automatically. Assess, locate exits, measure distance, do not show panic. But her legs had already made a decision without consulting her brain, and she was moving sideways through the crowd, not running, moving with the controlled speed of someone trying not to become a commotion. She did not watch where she was going. She walked directly into a man. The impact was substantial. She hit a wall of chest and shoulder and recoiled back, her drink sloshing, her bag swinging, and she would have lost her balance entirely except that a hand caught her arm. Not grabbed, caught. The distinction registered somewhere in the back of her mind as important even through the panic still ricocheting around her body. "Steady," said a voice. She looked up. The man holding her arm was Korean, perhaps late 30s, with a face that was composed with the particular stillness of someone who had trained themselves very carefully not to show reaction. He was wearing a dark suit that cost more than 2 of Amara's monthly paychecks. His other hand held a glass of something clear. He had not spilled a drop. Around him, without her noticing until just now, stood 3 other men in similar suits at varying distances, arranged with a precision that was not casual. They were not looking at her. They were looking at everything else. The man himself was looking at her, not the way the man in the dark coat looked at her, not with possession or threat or the cold calculation of someone who had decided to make her life a controlled experiment in fear. I was looking at her the way a person looks at something unexpected, with attention, and without immediately reaching a conclusion. "I'm sorry," Amara said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "No," he agreed. He released her arm. "You were watching something else." It was not a question. Amara became abruptly aware that she was breathing too fast and that this man, whoever he was, had registered it. She turned casually, the way someone casually glances around a room, and looked toward the spot where the figure in the dark coat had been standing. He was still there, still watching. The calculation she made in the next 4 seconds was not a rational one. Rational thought had checked out somewhere around the moment she'd seen the familiar figure across the room. What replaced it was something more animal, the recognition that she was visible, isolated, and that the man who had been shadowing her life for 3 weeks had followed her inside what was supposed to be a place safe enough to breathe. She turned back to the man she'd collided with. "Can I ask you something strange?" she said. He waited. He had very dark eyes and a quality of stillness that she would think about later, that way he had of simply receiving information without betraying what he was doing with it. "Will you dance with me?" she said. Her voice dropped. "Someone is watching me, and I just need to be somewhere they can't reach me for 5 minutes." The man looked at her for a long moment. Around them the music shifted, something slower moving in under the beat. Then he put his glass down on the nearest surface and held out his hand. She took it. They moved on to the floor and he put one hand at her back and she felt the absurd, disorienting sensation of being genuinely steadied by the man she'd just asked to hold her up. He was not a demonstrative dancer. He kept his movements minimal, controlled. He positioned her so that his body was between her and the side of the room where the figure had been standing. She noticed that. She did not say anything about it. "Is he still there?" she asked. The man's eyes moved, the smallest shift. "Not anymore." Amara released a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her for 3 weeks. Her forehead nearly dropped to his shoulder before she caught herself and straightened. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" He did not answer immediately. The song moved around them, and somewhere behind him one of the suited men had shifted position in a way that was not subtle once you knew to look for it. The crowd parted around this man, she realized, without quite seeming to intend to. a small, unconscious radius of space that people maintained without understanding why. It means, the man said, that whoever was watching you, they knew where you were before you walked through those doors. Amara went still. That is not the behavior of someone who found you by accident tonight, he continued. That is someone who knows your patterns, your schedule. She already knew this. She had known it for weeks. But hearing it stated plainly, without the dismissiveness of the police report or her own desperate self-reassurances, made it suddenly, terribly real in a new way. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her. "My name is Kang Jae-min," he said, and something shifted in the body language of the two nearest suited men. Not alarm exactly, but attention, as though the name itself warranted a particular kind of vigilance. Amara did not know the name. She did not know then what it meant in this city, in its particular underworld, the weight it carried in rooms that operated outside the law. She would learn. For now, she only knew that the man holding her on the dance floor had looked toward the place where her stalker had been standing, and the stalker was gone. And that for the first time in 3 weeks, her hands were not shaking. She did not know yet what she had walked into. She only knew she had walked out of something worse. But somewhere across the room, as the music swelled and the lights shifted gold, the man in the dark coat was already pulling out his phone, already sending a message to someone who was waiting to receive it. A message with a photograph attached. Amara on a dance floor. Amara in the arms of Kang Jae-min. The reply came back in under 30 seconds. Good, now we have leverage. Jae-min's car was a black Genesis with tinted windows and no plates visible from the outside, and Amara did not get into it willingly so much as she got into it because the alternative was standing on a Gangnam sidewalk at 1 in the morning, while somewhere behind her, a man with a camera phone was sending photographs of her face to someone she had never met. Ji-hee had been located, briefed in 30 seconds of urgent whispered Korean that Amara only partially followed, and had looked at Amara with an expression that was equal parts concern and something else, something that looked almost like recognition, as though Ji-hye had seen the name Kang Jae-min register on the face of one of the suited men and understood immediately what category of evening this had become. "Call me," Ji-hee said, gripping Amara's wrist. "I will. I mean it. The moment you're somewhere safe, you call me." Amara got in the car. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly medicinal, clean in the way that expensive things were clean. Jae-min sat beside her and did not speak for the first several minutes. The driver navigated without being given directions, which told Amara something. One of the suited men sat in the passenger seat. The other two had disappeared into a separate vehicle that followed at a distance she could see in the side mirror. Outside, Seoul moved past in its nighttime version. Neon and darkness, convenience stores burning bright at every corner, the Han River visible briefly between buildings before the road curved away from it. "Where are we going?" Amara asked. "Somewhere that isn't your apartment," Jae-min said. "Not yet. I didn't agree to that. You got in my car. I got in your car because someone in that club was sending pictures of me to someone I don't know, and you were the only person in the room who seemed to understand why that was a problem." She turned to look at him directly. "That is not the same as agreeing to go wherever you decide to take me." He looked at her. That same quality of stillness, receiving her words without immediately reflecting anything back. "Fair," he said. "So where are we going?" "A restaurant I own. It's closed now. We can sit somewhere private, and you can tell me what you know about the man who is watching you, and I can tell you what I know. Then you decide what happens next." Amara sat with that for a moment. Her heart rate had come down from the club, but not all the way down. "You know something about him?" "I know something about the photograph he took tonight," Jae-min said. "And I know who he sent it to." The car moved through an intersection, and Amara pressed her back against the seat and stared at the city sliding past her window and tried to locate the version of herself that had walked out of Seoul General 8 hours ago, tired and competent and completely certain about the shape of her life. That woman felt very far away. "How do you know who he sent it to?" she asked. Jae-min did not answer immediately. Outside, the city compressed into a narrower street, and the driver slowed. "Because," Jae-min said, "the man who received it has been trying to reach me for a long time." So, the restaurant was called something in Korean she didn't catch, located on a side street that felt intentionally hidden. the kind of place that existed for people who didn't want to be found eating. The interior was dark wood and low light, the kitchen cold and quiet, a single booth in the back corner lit by a lamp that cast more shadow than illumination. A woman appeared from somewhere in the back, older, severe, not a server exactly, more like someone who managed things, and placed 2 cups of tea on the table without being asked and disappeared again. Amara wrapped both hands around her cup because her hands needed something to do. "Start from the beginning," Jae-min said. "How long?" 3 months. Something shifted in his jaw. Barely visible, but there. 3 months. Since mid-October. I started noticing him outside my apartment building, then near the hospital, then... She stopped. "You already knew it was 3 months." He didn't confirm it and didn't deny it, which was its own kind of confirmation. Amara set her cup down carefully. The sound it made against the table was very small in the quiet restaurant. "You've been watching me too." "It's not the same." That's an interesting thing to say to someone who just asked you to confirm or deny whether you've been surveilling her life. Her voice stayed level. It cost her something. "How long have you known about the man outside my building?" "Since November." The word landed like something physical. Amara absorbed it. "November," she repeated. "It's January." "Yes." "You've known for 2 months that someone was following me." "I've known for 2 months that someone connected to Han Seok-won was monitoring you," he said. "That's different from knowing someone was following you specifically with intent to harm." "I'm going to need you to explain who Han Seok-won is." "In a moment." He leaned forward slightly. "First, I need to know if you remember a patient. October, maybe the 9th or 10th. Emergency admission, stab wounds to the abdomen and shoulder. He would have given a false name. He was brought in by 2 men who left before the paperwork was processed." Amara looked at him. In her 2 years at Seoul General, she had treated hundreds of emergency admissions. She remembered the ones who almost didn't make it, remembered the technical details of interventions, remembered the particular sounds of rooms where the margin was very thin. She remembered October 9th. "He almost died on the table," she said slowly. The shoulder wound was clean, but the abdominal laceration had nicked the inferior mesenteric artery. Most of the ER team had written him off by the time I got to him. She paused. "He was conscious when they brought him in. He kept trying to get up. We had to restrain him." "He told me," Jae-min said. Something cold moved through her. "That was your man." "His name is Park Sung-il. He has worked for me for 11 years. For the first time, something that was not perfect composure moved across Jae-min's face, a tightening around the eyes. "He has a daughter who is 6 years old. When I tell you that he would not be alive to see her if not for what you did that night, I am not speaking in approximations." Amara was quiet. "I don't know why that changes what you've done," she said finally. "You still watched me for 2 months without telling me there was a threat." "I didn't know the extent of the threat until recently." "But you knew something." "Yes, and you decided that was information I didn't need to have." "I decided," he said, and his voice stayed even, but something underneath it had an edge now. "That approaching you directly would expose you to exactly the kind of attention I was trying to prevent you from receiving. Han Seok-won's people were already watching you because of what you'd done, because they'd seen you save Park Sung-il. The moment I made direct contact, you became something other than a bystander in their calculation. So instead you had people watch me from a distance. Yes. And the man in the dark coat was not one of mine." Amara picked up her tea again. Her hands were steadier now, which she didn't entirely trust. Sometimes steadiness was just the body deciding it couldn't sustain alarm anymore, not actually being okay. She took a sip. It was bitter and very hot, and it helped. "You said he sent the photograph to someone who's been trying to reach you," she said. "Han Seok-won." Han Seok-won was a rival organization leader. Emphasis on was. A pause. 3 years ago, I had confirmation that he'd been killed during an internal power dispute within his own organization. The intelligence was verified through 3 independent channels. But the photograph tonight was routed through a communication channel that Han Seok-won's organization used exclusively, a channel that has been dead for 3 years. He looked at her steadily. Which means either someone has resurrected his infrastructure, or Han Seok-won is not dead. The restaurant was very quiet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pipe knocked once and went silent. "And I'm in the middle of this," Amara said, "because I saved the wrong man's life." "You saved a man's life. There is no wrong version of that. Don't." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Don't dress this up. I am being stalked by someone connected to a Korean organized crime feud because I did my job one night in October, and you have known about that connection for 2 months and did not tell me. And right now someone has a photograph of my face that they sent to a person who may or may not be dead. And in any of those scenarios, I am in a situation that is significantly worse than the one I thought I was in." She stopped, breathed. "That is what this is. Don't make it sound like something else." Jae-min looked at her without flinching. "You're right," he said. She had not expected that. "I made a decision that I believed protected you," he said. "I may have been wrong about what protection looked like in this case. I was not wrong about the threat." That's a very careful sentence. I'm a very careful man. Careful men don't sit across from strangers in closed restaurants at 1 in the morning explaining organized crime history. Something happened at the edge of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of the concept of one. "No," he agreed. "They don't." He had one of his people drive her home. Not Jae-min himself. He stayed at the restaurant, receiving a phone call the moment she stood to leave. And the way he answered it, the shift in his posture, the way the room seemed to contract around him as he turned away, told her clearly that she was being dismissed from a conversation that was going to become something she wasn't supposed to witness. She didn't argue. She was too tired to argue and too wired to sleep, which was the worst possible combination. The driver, a different man from earlier, younger, who introduced himself as Min and then said nothing else for the entire ride, delivered her to her building with efficient silence. She took the elevator up, double-locked her door, left the lights on in the entryway, and sat on the edge of her bed with her coat still on for a long time. She called Ji-hye. "Are you safe?" Ji-hye answered on the first ring. "I'm home. I'm fine." A pause. "Ji-hye, what do you know about Kang Jae-min?" Silence on the other end. A particular kind of silence, the kind that meant Ji-hye was deciding how much to say. "Ji-hye. He runs things." Ji-hye's voice was careful. "Businesses, officially, import, real estate, some entertainment venues. But everyone knows the businesses they're the surface of something else. Organized crime." "Amara, I'm not asking you to characterize it. I'm asking what you know." "He's not someone you want to be connected to," Ji-hye said. "Not because he's dangerous to people around him in general. From what I've heard, he's actually very controlled, very precise, not the kind of person who creates collateral damage. But because being associated with him makes you visible to people who want to get to him, and those people are not—" She stopped. "Why are you asking me this at 1:30 in the morning from your apartment?" "Because I had tea with him an hour ago, and now I need to understand what I've stepped into." The silence this time was longer. "Come to mine tomorrow, early, before your shift." "Okay." "Amara." Ji-hye's voice had dropped to something serious. "He's not a bad person, as far as anyone can tell. But his world has very sharp edges, and people who stand near those edges get cut regardless of whose side they're on." Amara lay back on her bed, still in her coat, and stared at her ceiling. "I know," she said. She hung up and lay there for another hour before sleep came. And when it did, it was thin and restless, threaded through with the image of a man in a dark coat standing very still on a sidewalk, watching her, and somewhere beyond him another image, a photograph of her face traveling through a dead communication channel to someone who was supposed to be gone. The flowers arrived 4 days later. White peonies, her absolute favorite, in a vase too expensive to have come from a street vendor. They were sitting outside the nurse's station when she arrived for her morning shift, no card, no sender information, just the flowers and the particular quality of attention that had been paid to the choice of them. Ji-hye saw Amara's face when she looked at them and immediately came around the station desk. "What?" "Someone knows I like peonies," Amara said. Her voice was very quiet. That's not a general knowledge thing. I've never mentioned that to anyone at work except—" She stopped. Except she had mentioned it once to Jae-min's driver Min during the ride home, in the awkward way you made conversation with a silent stranger, had said something about the flower stalls they were passing, had said she'd been wanting to get peonies for her windowsill since she arrived in Seoul, but never remembered to stop. Min had said nothing, but someone had been listening. She went to the break room and called the number Jae-min had given her. He picked up on the third ring. "The flowers," she said. "Was that you?" A pause. Brief, but she caught it. "No," he said. "Someone sent white peonies to my workplace. Someone who knows they're my favorite, which means someone heard what I said in your car 4 nights ago, which means—" She stopped, reran the logic. "Which means either your car is monitored or one of your people is talking to someone they shouldn't be." The quality of Jae-min's silence changed. She could feel it through the phone, a sharpening, a focusing, the stillness becoming something else entirely. "Don't touch the flowers," he said. "Don't throw them away. Leave them exactly where they are. I'll have someone there within the hour. Jae-min, Amara." His voice stayed level, but something underneath the level had become very cold. "That is not a gift. That is a message. Do you understand me? The flowers are for me, not for you." She stood in the break room with the phone at her ear and the familiar smell of the hospital around her, coffee and disinfectant and the low hum of climate control, and felt the ground shift again under her feet. That sensation she'd been carrying since October of the stable surface of her life becoming unreliable, giving way under weight she didn't choose to put on it. "What does the message say?" she asked. "It says that he can reach you." A pause. "It says that my protection has limits." 2 hours later, while she was in the middle of a routine assessment in Bay 4, a nurse's aide found her and handed her a folded piece of paper that had been left at the main reception desk by someone who had already gone. She unfolded it in the hallway, alone. 4 words. "He cannot protect you." And below that, in smaller writing, a date and time 2 weeks away. She did not know what the date meant. She did not know if it was a deadline or an appointment or a threat with a countdown. She only knew that someone had been inside the communication channel of Kang Jae-min's organization, or close enough to it to hear a passing comment about flowers in a car, and had used that proximity to reach across the distance between the criminal world and the clean, bright corridors of Seoul General Hospital and slide a piece of paper into the ordinary machinery of her working day. She called Jae-min again. He arrived at the hospital himself this time, which she had not expected, in a car that pulled up to the staff entrance and stayed running. He came inside only far enough to take the note from her hand and read it. His face did not change. "The date," she said. "What happens on that date?" He folded the note once and put it in his jacket pocket. "I don't know yet." "That's not a good answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her then, directly, and for the first time she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not warmth exactly, not the soft edges of concern, but something more unsettled than his usual composure. A crack in the architecture. "I need you to consider staying somewhere other than your apartment for the next few days. Somewhere I can—" "No," she said immediately. "Amara, no, I am not moving into your protection arrangement. I am not. I have a job. I have a life. I am not going to restructure my entire existence because someone is playing a game with you that I got accidentally caught in." His jaw tightened. "This is not a game." "I know it's not a game. That is exactly why I'm not going to pretend that going wherever you decide is safe actually makes me safer. Because you thought you had things handled 2 months ago and someone is sending me notes at my workplace." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not wrong," he said finally. "But you're also not accounting for what happens if Han Seok-wan decides you're more useful to him as leverage than as a message." "What does that mean?" He held her eyes. It means the flowers and the note are communications directed at me. They're escalating. When that kind of escalation runs out of steps..." He stopped. "The next step is not a note." The corridor was busy around them. Nurses passing, gurneys moving, the constant mechanical rhythm of a hospital at mid-morning. Normal life at full volume, completely indifferent to the conversation happening in its middle. Amara felt it again. That thing she'd been feeling since October. The invisible thread connecting her to something she'd never asked to touch. Except now the thread had a name, 2 names actually, Kang Jae-min, Han Seok-wan, and she was the point between them. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He seemed briefly surprised by the question, as though he'd expected more resistance and had already arranged his arguments against it. "Tell me your schedule," he said. For the next 2 weeks. Every shift, every regular stop, any deviation from your usual routine. So you can have people there. So I know where you are. That, Amara said, is what he has been doing to me for 3 months. Jae-min absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, watched the thing she'd said land somewhere real, watched him resist the impulse to immediately reframe it. I know, he said. I know what it sounds like. Does it sound different from the inside? The question sat between them in the corridor noise for a long moment. I'll have someone at a distance, he said. You won't see them. You won't know they're there. I want to know they're there. He paused. All right. And if something happens, if another note, another delivery, anything, you tell me immediately. You don't sit on it for 2 months deciding what I need to know. All right. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. And something in the way he said it, not placating, not performing sincerity, just stating it as a fact he'd already arrived at, made her believe him more than she expected to. She went back to work. He went back to his car. And that evening, when she walked out of Seoul General at the end of her shift and passed the small cafe on the corner where she sometimes stopped for coffee, she noticed the man seated near the window with a newspaper. Not reading it, not exactly, just occupying the table with the specific stillness of someone placed there. He did not look at her. She kept walking. For the first time in 3 months, she did not check over her shoulder at the corner. It was not safety, exactly. She was clear-eyed enough to know that. It was the substitution of one uncertainty for another, the replacement of an unknown threat with a known one, and there was something deeply uncomfortable about finding comfort in that exchange. But her hands were not shaking, and then, 9 days later, the package arrived at her apartment. Not at the hospital, not left with a receptionist. At her apartment door, which meant someone had been inside her building, past the security door, up the elevator, down her specific hallway, and had stood outside her specific door long enough to leave something. It was a small box. No marking. She almost didn't open it. Inside was a bracelet, slender silver links with a small dark clasp, and a note in handwriting she recognized now as Jae-min's, brief and without preamble. Wear this. Don't take it off. JM. She turned the bracelet over in her hands. It was not jewelry, or not only jewelry. The clasp had a slight density to it that didn't match the rest, a heaviness that was functional, not decorative, and when she looked closely at the underside, there was a seam that did not belong on an ornamental piece. She put it on anyway. She told herself it was pragmatic. She told herself it was not the beginning of trusting him. She told herself a lot of things that night, standing in her hallway with the empty box on her floor, wearing a bracelet she didn't fully understand from a man she was not supposed to feel safe with. But somewhere across the city, in a room she had never seen, a screen registered a signal, and Kang Jae-min exhaled for the first time in 9 days. He did not examine why. What he did not know, what neither of them knew, was that 3 floors below Amara's apartment, in a vehicle that had been parked on her street for 6 hours, a man with a phone was watching the same signal appear on a different screen, and typing a message to someone who had been waiting for exactly this confirmation, that the woman was close enough to Kang Jae-min to accept what he gave her, that she was no longer just a bystander, that she was the door. The date on the note came and went without incident. That was the part that undid her. She had spent 2 weeks bracing for something, a confrontation, an escalation, some concrete event that would at least have the decency to be visible. She had gone to work with her shoulders up around her ears and come home checking her hallway before stepping off the elevator and slept with her phone face up on the nightstand, volume at maximum. She had worn the bracelet every single day and tried not to think about what wearing it meant. And then the date passed. A Tuesday, cold and unremarkable, and nothing happened. No note, no flowers, no message through any channel. She called Jae-min that evening. The date passed, she said when he answered. I know. What does that mean? It means he changed the timeline. Or it means the date wasn't a deadline, it was a marker, something that was supposed to happen on that date that we weren't supposed to know about. A pause on his end. Yes, that's the more accurate reading. So something happened 2 days ago that we don't know about yet. My people are working on it. That is becoming a sentence I hear a lot from you. I know, he said, and he sounded tired, which was the first time she had detected anything like fatigue in him. It was strangely humanizing, and she resented it for that reason. She hung up and sat with the particular anxiety of waiting for an outcome you cannot see or control, which she was beginning to understand was the defining experience of being adjacent to Kang Jae-min's world. He invited her to dinner 6 days later. Not through Min, not through a message routed via Ji-hai, but through a phone call he made himself at 7 in the evening while she was eating leftover rice at her kitchen counter and watching the news with the volume low. "There's a restaurant," he said, "private dining room. I'd like to talk to you about what we've learned." "About the date?" "About several things." She almost said no. She had turned the bracelet over on her wrist with the thumb of her other hand, feeling the slight weight of the clasp, and thought about the man 3 floors down who had been watching the signal appear on a different screen. "What time?" she said. The restaurant was in Itaewon, a neighborhood that surprised her. She'd expected somewhere anonymous, somewhere that announced power through its restraint. Instead, the building was narrow and unassuming, the sign small enough to miss if you weren't looking, and the private room in the back had exposed brick walls and a single candle on the table and felt almost ordinary. Almost. Jae-min was already there when she arrived. He stood when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and she noticed he'd chosen to sit facing the door. Not romantic positioning, tactical positioning, and she'd begun to read these things in him now, the small architectural choices of someone who had survived by never being caught unaware. There was wine on the table. He did not pour it until she sat down and indicated she wanted some. "Tell me about Han Seok-won," she said, before he could frame the conversation himself. He looked at her. "I was going to get to that." "Get to it now." He poured the wine, set the bottle down, turned the glass once on the table. These were the kinds of small delays she'd noticed in him. Not stalling, exactly, more like the habits of a man who had learned to choose his words the way a surgeon chose instruments. Han Seok-won built his organization in the mid-2000s, he said. Extortion, initially. Then trafficking of restricted goods, not people, commodities. Pharmaceutical counterfeits, weapons components, stolen industrial technology. He was intelligent. He understood that the most sustainable criminal enterprises were the ones that looked most like legitimate industry from the outside. And you competed with him. Our territories overlapped. That's a polite way to describe it. A pause. I was responsible for the death of 3 people who worked for me. One of them had been with me since I was 22 years old. The candle moved between them. Amara said nothing. In 2021, there was an internal conflict within his organization. A senior lieutenant named Cho believed Han was becoming reckless. Cho reached out to us. We facilitated the outcome. You helped Cho remove him. We provided intelligence that led to Han Seok-won being present at a location where Cho's faction was waiting. And you believed he died there. 3 sources confirmed it. Physical evidence was consistent. We had no reason to doubt it. He picked up his wine and set it back down without drinking. What we've learned in the past week is that Cho falsified the confirmation. Han Seok-won was present at the location, but escaped. Cho reported him dead because Cho wanted to absorb Han's network without the complication of a rival who knew where all the bodies were buried. He paused. Literally, in some cases. So Cho lied to you. Cho is no longer in a position to lie to anyone. The way he said it, flat, factual, moving past it immediately, told her everything she needed to know about what had happened to Cho, and she chose not to ask the follow-up question. Han Seok-won has been rebuilding for 3 years, Jae-min continued. Outside Seoul, outside Korea partly. He's been patient, more patient than I gave him credit for. And his move, the stalking, the notes, the flowers, it's all been designed to do what exactly? Unsettle you? Unsettle me. Expose gaps in my organization. The leak in the car communication is one. Draw me into a reactive position. He looked at her steadily. And identify what I would move to protect. She held his gaze. Me. You became visible to him because of Park Sung-il, because you saved someone I value, someone I've publicly maintained a relationship with for over a decade. Han Seok-won is methodical. He would have looked at everyone connected to my organization and mapped their vulnerabilities. Park Sung-il's vulnerability is his daughter. Mine is... He stopped. Say it. You, he said. You became my vulnerability. Except I'm not yours, she said. I'm a nurse who saved a man's life and got pulled into someone else's war. I know that. Do you? She set her wine glass down. Because the way you're describing this, identifying what you would move to protect, that assumes Han Seok-won's assessment is correct. That I am something you would move to protect. And I want to be very clear with you that I did not agree to be a piece in this. I know you didn't. So how did I become one? He was quiet for a moment. The candle threw shadows against the brick wall behind him. Because I made choices over the past 3 months that made you one. The surveillance, the bracelet, the arrangement with the men outside the hospital. Every step I took to protect you also confirmed to anyone watching that you mattered enough to protect. Amara sat with that. The logic was clean and terrible, and she had already half understood it, but having it stated openly was different from the half understanding. So your protection, she said, is part of what put me in danger. Yes. The honesty was disarming. She had expected him to reframe it, to present it at an angle that made his choices look better. He didn't. He just sat across from her in the candlelight with the same quality of stillness he always had, and told her the truth as he understood it and let her do whatever she needed to do with it. She ate. He ate. They talked about other things for a while. Careful things, neutral things, the city, her work. A question he asked about the emergency medicine protocols she'd used on Park Sung-il that demonstrated he'd actually wanted to understand what had happened that night, not just the outcome. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone in Seoul, how she'd almost quit nursing twice in Atlanta, once after a pediatric case that hadn't gone well, once after a year of short staffing that had ground her down to something she didn't recognize. How the transfer to Seoul had felt less like opportunity and more like flight, away from a life that had become too small, towards something undefined that she couldn't name but needed. He listened the way he did everything, with complete undivided attention that felt sometimes like being studied and sometimes like being genuinely seen, and she was not always certain which one it was. It was late when she said she needed to go. He walked her to the car. Mine was waiting. Be careful going home, Jae-min said. It was such an ordinary thing to say that she almost laughed. You have a man parked outside my building. I know. Be careful anyway. She got in the car. He stood on the sidewalk and watched until the car turned the corner, which she saw in the side mirror, and she turned away from the mirror and stared forward and told herself that the warmth she felt was just the wine and the warm restaurant and the particular relief of having been honest with someone after weeks of careful performance. She almost believed it. She found the room by accident. That was the thing she kept coming back to afterward. She had not gone looking. She had not been suspicious, had not followed a thread or acted on a hunch. She had simply been in a place she hadn't expected to be in and opened a door that wasn't locked because no one had anticipated she would be there to open it. It was 2 weeks after the dinner. Jae-min had invited her to his office building, not his organization's operational center, she understood, but a legitimate business address, the kind of place with a receptionist and a glass-walled conference room. He had some documents related to her hospital's security that he'd wanted her to review, something about a vulnerability his people had identified in the building's visitor access system that could be exploited to approach her at work. She had arrived early. The receptionist had sent her toward Jae-min's private office on the 4th floor and told her he'd be 5 minutes. The door to his office was open. She went in, sat down, and then stood back up because she'd been sitting for 12 hours and her lower back was protesting. She walked to the window, looked out at the street below, turned and looked at the office itself. Organized, minimalist, the desk clear, except for a single notepad and a closed laptop. 2 filing cabinets against the far wall. A door beside the cabinets that she had assumed was a closet. She did not intend to open it. She was going to look out the window again and then sit down and wait. Instead, her hand went to the door handle, some automatic motion, the body doing things the mind hadn't fully authorized. And the door opened. It was not a closet. It was a small secondary room, perhaps 8 feet by 10, with no window, and the walls, 3 of them, floor to ceiling, were covered in photographs. Her brain required several seconds to process what she was seeing, to move from the raw visual input through comprehension to understanding, and during those seconds she stood in the doorway with her hand on the handle and simply looked. There were hundreds of them, printed photographs, some from what looked like long-lens cameras, some from angles she recognized as security footage, time-stamped in the corners, arranged chronologically, left to right, top to bottom, with a precision that suggested the arrangement itself had been deliberate and careful. Her leaving Seoul General in her coat. Her at the subway entrance, head down, bag on one shoulder. Her at the cafe 3 blocks from her apartment, sitting by the window with a book she barely remembered reading. Her at the flower stall she'd mentioned to Min, paused in front of the white peonies, not buying them, just looking. Her apartment building's entrance, her key in the lock. Her figure visible through her kitchen window. Her bedroom window. Not inside, the angle was wrong for inside, but the window itself, the light pattern behind it, the shadow of her moving behind the glass before she'd turned off the lamp. 12 weeks of her life, documented, organized, and stored in a locked room in a man's office building. She stood there long enough that she became aware of the sound of her own breathing. Too fast. The kind of breathing that preceded a very specific biological response. Not panic yet, not quite, but the body converting to emergency fuel, preparing for the options of fight or flight before the mind had finished deciding which was appropriate. She stepped back out of the room. She pulled the door closed. She stood in the middle of Jae-min's office and looked at the carpet under her feet and said, very quietly, to no one, "Okay." Just that. Okay. The word you say when nothing is okay and you need a placeholder while you figure out what comes next. She heard him in the hallway. His footsteps were distinctive, not heavy, controlled, the particular rhythm of someone who moved through spaces with deliberate economy. She heard him say something brief to the receptionist, heard the quality of the conversation shift as he disengaged and moved toward his office door. She was standing by the window when he came in. "Sorry," he said. "The call ran longer than—" He stopped. Something in her posture had communicated itself. She felt him read the room, felt the way his attention sharpened and traveled to her face and then, involuntarily, to the door of the secondary room. Silence. "Amara, don't he?" Her voice came out very flat. Not the anger she might have expected. Something underneath anger, something that had already moved past it. "Don't start with my name." He stood in the middle of the office. He did not move toward her. She registered that he'd had the instinct to read the distance she needed, and had honored it, and even now, even in this moment, she noticed it and resented herself for noticing. "How long have you been watching me?" she said. "Since November." "All of it." She gestured toward the closed door without looking at it. "You took those photographs." "My people took them. Under my direction." "My bedroom window." A pause. "The exterior of your building, never inside." "My bedroom window, Jae-min." To confirm the perimeter was secure. He stopped, heard himself. "I understand how that sounds." "Do you?" It was not a question. "Do you understand how it feels to look at a wall covered in pictures of yourself that you didn't know were being taken? Pictures of the inside of your apartment through your own window?" Her voice stayed level. The leveling cost her something she could feel. "You told me the man in the dark coat was Han Seok-won's. You told me you only knew he was there in November. But these photographs start before November. These photographs start in October." He said nothing. "October," she repeated, "right after I saved Park Sung-il, which means you started having me photographed before you had any reason connected to Han Seok-won. Which means Han Seok-won is— what? A rationale that got added later? Something that made what you were already doing sound like protection instead of— No." His voice had an edge now. Not raised, never raised, but an edge she hadn't heard before. "I began having you watched because Park Sung-il had been targeted inside the hospital. We believed whoever had attacked him might have identified staff who'd had contact with him. The photographs were a security protocol to assess the threat. For 3 months. The threat did not resolve in 3 months. You kept 3 months of photographs of me in a room in your office." He didn't answer that. "Why are they still here?" she said. "If it was a security protocol, if it was procedural, why aren't they in some operational file somewhere? Why are they here in this room, organized like—" She stopped herself from finishing the sentence because finishing it would mean naming what the organization of those photographs looked like, and she was not ready to name that. Jae-min stood very still. "I don't have a good answer for that," he said. "Try." He looked at her. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked like a man who had been caught without a prepared position, without the calm architecture of his composure fully assembled. You were the first person who saw Park Sung-il as a person, he said, in the hospital. My people told me afterward, they said the nurse who worked on him, she didn't look at him with fear or disgust or the particular way medical staff look at people they've assessed as dangerous. She just worked. She talked to him while she worked. She told him he was going to be all right in a voice that sounded like she meant it. Amara said nothing, nothing. I know what it looks like, he said. I know what it is. It is the behavior of someone who became... He stopped, reassembled. I told myself it was surveillance. I know that it was more than that. I don't know how to explain the more than that in a way that makes it something other than what you're thinking. What am I thinking? That I'm the same as the man in the dark coat. The room was very quiet. Are you? She said. No. His voice was certain in a way that most of his voice was not certain. But I understand that certainty about that distinction is mine to hold, not yours. You don't have to take my word for what I intended. She looked at him for a long moment. She was running calculations she could not have named, measuring the weight of what she'd seen against the weight of everything else. The dinner, the honesty, the particular care he'd taken not to crowd her, the way Park Sung-il had looked at her when she'd encountered him once in Jae-min's company, the simple, undisguised gratitude of a man who had come back from very far away. None of it made the room behind that door something she could simply accept. I'm leaving, she said. Amara, I heard everything you said and I am still leaving. He didn't try to stop her. That too she registered, filed, did not know what to do with. She was in the elevator when the shaking started. In her hands first, then her arms, the body finally collecting on the debt of holding itself together in that room. She pressed her back against the elevator wall and breathed through it, counted floors, got to the ground level, walked through the lobby and out onto the street. The cold hit her like a correction. She walked 3 blocks before she noticed Min was following at a distance. She turned and looked directly at him, and he stopped. They regarded each other on the sidewalk in the January dark. I don't want a car, she said. He nodded once and didn't move to follow her. She took the subway home. She sat on the train with her hands folded in her lap and the bracelet on her wrist, and the particular hollowed-out feeling of someone who has just discovered that 2 things they believe to be opposites are in fact the same thing wearing different clothes. She had thought she understood the difference between the man in the dark coat and Kang Jae-min. Now she was not certain the difference was as clean as she'd needed it to be. She got off at her station, climbed the stairs to the street, walked the 2 blocks to her building. She was reaching for her keys when someone stepped out of the shadow beside the building entrance. Not from behind her, from the side, from the covered alcove where the trash bins were kept, moving fast and low and with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting there long enough to have a plan. The arm came around her from behind before she could process the movement, locking across her collarbone, yanking her back hard enough that her feet left the ground for a half second. Her keys hit the pavement. Her bag swung. She opened her mouth and didn't get a sound out before something pressed against her face. Fabric, chemical smell. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And the sodium lights above the building entrance began to spiral and separate, and the cold pavement of Seoul became irrelevant because she was going somewhere else, somewhere she hadn't chosen, somewhere that was rapidly becoming very dark. The last thing her conscious mind registered before the dark took over completely was the bracelet on her wrist, the slight weight of the clasp against her pulse point, and the thought, half-formed, desperate, aimed at no one, and at one person specifically, find me. The signal came through at 11:47. Jae-min was still in his office when it hit his phone. Not the primary device, the secondary one, the one that ran the encrypted monitoring software, the one he checked with the specific dread of a man who has set up a system hoping never to need it. The screen lit up with a single pulsing indicator, location coordinates updating in real time, and for 3 seconds he simply stared at it with the phone in his hand and felt something move through him that he had not felt in a very long time. Fear, clean, and total and unmanageable. He was already moving before the 3 seconds were up. He hit Park Sung-il's number as he came out of the office. Park picked up on the phone, which was one of the many reasons Jae-min had kept him close for 11 years. She's been taken. His voice came out level. He did not understand how. The bracelet signal is active and moving. Southeast from her building, toward the industrial corridor past Seoul. He was in the elevator. Get everyone. How many? Everyone Sung-il, leave nobody. He was in his car in 4 minutes. The driver did not ask questions. The secondary phone sat in his palm with the pulsing signal moving at a speed consistent with a vehicle, heading east-southeast, the coordinates updating every 30 seconds. She was still moving. The signal was consistent. The bracelet was intact. She was alive. He told himself that. He said it the way you say something you need to remain true by the force of insisting on it. She was alive. The signal was moving. He had time. He did not examine what the inside of him was doing while he said it. Amara came back to consciousness in pieces. First, cold. Not the ambient cold of January, but the deep, structural cold of a space that had not been heated in a long time, concrete and trapped air, and the particular absence of warmth that belonged to buildings no one lived in. Second, the smell. Industrial solvent, old metal, something organic underneath it that she did not want to identify. Third, her hands bound behind her, wrists crossed and secured with something that felt like zip ties, tight enough to have interrupted the circulation on the right side, her fingers numb past the second knuckle. Fourth, her mouth ungagged, which she registered with clinical detachment as a choice. Either they didn't care if she made noise, or they were somewhere noise didn't matter. She did not open her eyes immediately. She catalogued what she could determine without alerting anyone that she was conscious. The chair she was seated in was metal, bolted to something or simply heavy. She could not determine which. Her feet were on the floor. Her ankles were not bound. The sounds around her were male voices, 2 distinct ones in Korean, speaking at a register that suggested they were not in the same room or were far enough away to be heard but not clearly. She opened her eyes. Warehouse. High ceiling, the structural beams visible above her in the dark. 3 industrial lights functioning out of what had probably once been a bank of 8, the rest either burned out or deliberately killed. The floor was raw concrete, stacks of something covered in plastic sheeting along the far wall. 2 exits visible from where she sat, a loading dock door to her left, closed, and a standard door to her right, cracked open, the voices coming from beyond it. She was alone in the main space. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and took her own pulse by counting her heartbeats against the constraint at her wrists. Elevated but not catastrophic. The chemical they'd used to subdue her had left a headache behind her eyes and a metallic taste on the back of her tongue, but her thinking felt clear, or clear enough. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist, her right wrist, which was the one bound against her left, both hands crossed behind the chair back. She couldn't see the bracelet, but she could feel it. The slender silver links, the slight weight of the clasp against her pulse point. It was still there. They hadn't removed it. Either they didn't know what it was, or they did know what it was and they wanted it left on. Both possibilities had implications. She decided not to determine which one was true and instead focused on the ankle restraint problem, which was that there wasn't one, which meant her feet were free, which meant her options were more varied than they might otherwise have been. She was testing the weight distribution of the chair, whether it was bolted down, whether she could move it, when the door to her right opened fully and a man walked through it. He was not what she had constructed in her mind from the context of everything she'd been told. She had built Han Seok-won from available materials, a man described through his actions, his patience, his methodical cruelty, a man who had survived being reported dead and spent 3 years rebuilding from nothing. She had expected someone who looked like what he'd done. He looked like an accountant, middle-aged, unremarkable, a face that would disappear in a crowd without effort, the kind of man who stood in lines and waited his turn and left no impression on the people around him. He was wearing a dark sweater and slacks and carrying a paper cup of something hot, and he looked at her with the calm of someone arriving at a scheduled appointment. "You're awake," he said in accented English. "I was told you might take longer." She did not respond. He pulled a chair from somewhere behind her. She heard it scraping, felt him move around her periphery, the hair on her arms going up at the deliberate nature of the movement, and then he was in front of her, sitting, the paper cup balanced on his knee, regarding her with the focused attention of a man assessing a piece of equipment. "My name is Han Seok-won," he said. "You don't know me." "I know who you are," she said. Her voice came out even. She was almost surprised. Something registered on his face. Not surprise, adjustment, a recalibration. "He told you about me." "Enough." "What did he tell you?" "That you were supposed to be dead." Han Seok-won smiled. It did not reach anything above the muscles required to produce it. That was a mutual misunderstanding I've had the pleasure of correcting. He sipped from the paper cup. The domesticity of it was grotesque in a way she couldn't entirely name. I want to talk about Kang Jae-min. I don't have anything to tell you about him. No, you probably don't. He's careful about what he shares and with whom. He tilted his head. What I want to discuss is not information, it's function. You are here, Ms. Bennett, not because of what you know. You're here because of what you mean. I don't mean anything to him. I'm a person he don't. The single word flat, and something in the quality of it made her stop. I've been watching Kang Jae-min for 3 years. I have watched him make and unmake relationships, business arrangements, loyalties. I know what his protection looks like when it is procedural, and I know what it looks like when it is something else. His eyes moved to the bracelet she couldn't see on her wrist behind her. He put a tracking device on your wrist. That is not a security protocol for a civilian bystander. That is a man protecting something he is afraid to lose. Amara said nothing. He is afraid, Han Seok-won said, with the satisfaction of someone stating a long-sought proof, because you made him afraid, which means you have done something in 3 months that his rivals have been unable to do in 20 years. He set the paper cup on the floor, leaned forward slightly. You made him human. And you want to use that, she said. I want him to feel what I felt when he took everything from me. His voice did not rise. That was almost worse than if it had the flat, controlled delivery of words that should have had heat in them, the emotion compressed to a density that had calcified into something beyond anger. My organization, my people, my name. He used me against myself, turned my own people, and then told the world I was dead, which meant I could not even rebuild openly. I had to become a ghost to survive. The eyes held hers. I want him to know what it is to lose something he cannot replace. You mean me, she said. You are the message, he said. You were always the message. The flowers, the notes, the photographs in his little room. He paused at her reaction, clocked it, moved past it. Yes, I know about the room. I told you. I have been watching him for 3 years. Everything he did to track you, I watched him do it. And I watched him do it with a specificity and an attention that told me exactly what I needed to know about where his vulnerability lived. She made herself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The headache behind her eyes pulsed once, hard, and then settled back to its baseline throb. What do you want from him? She said. I want him to come here, Han said simply. I want him to walk into this building to save you because a man in that state, frightened, reactive, operating from emotion instead of calculation, makes mistakes. And Kang Jae-min's mistakes are worth more to me than his death. He paused. Well, his mistakes first, then his death. In that order. She looked at him. You know the bracelet is a tracker. Of course. So you left it on deliberately. I left it on because I want him to find you. That is precisely the point. He picked the cup back up. The question he will have to answer when he arrives is how much he is willing to spend to get you out of here, what he is willing to sacrifice, what errors he will make in the heat of caring about something. He sipped. I have 12 men in this building. I have 4 more outside. He will bring more, probably, but he will bring them fast and without full intelligence because he will be afraid of the time he's spending gathering information while you sit in this room. Fear of losing time, that is a vulnerability. Amara understood then with total clarity that she was not simply a hostage waiting for rescue. She was a mechanism. The entire architecture of the past 3 months had been designed to build her into this specific function, to be the thing that made Kang Jae-min run toward a trap at full speed. She also understood, with the same clarity, that understanding this did not change her immediate circumstances. Her wrists were still bound. She was still in a warehouse outside Seoul with 12 armed men between her and the exit, but her feet were free, and the door to her right was 15 feet away. She had just begun to measure distances and angles with the systematic focus of a woman who had spent years making life-or-death assessments under time pressure when the lights went out. Not one of them, all of them. The 3 functioning industrial lights died simultaneously, and the warehouse dropped into a darkness so complete that Amara felt it as a physical pressure, her eyes finding nothing to anchor to, the vertigo of total black hitting her inner ear like a wave. Then sounds. The loading dock door, not opening, detonating. The concussive bang of it being forced off its tracks reverberated through the concrete floor and up through the chair legs and into Amara's spine. And then there was movement everywhere, multiple vectors, boot falls on the concrete and shouted Korean, and the specific cracking sound of something she identified 3 years of emergency room experience as a contact strike. Someone was screaming to her left, cut off. Closer now, very close, another impact. A body hitting the floor at a distance she felt more than heard. Then a flashlight beam, low to the ground, sweeping, finding her, moving toward her fast. She had 1 second to decide whether to try to run or to hold still, and she held still, because the way the flashlight was moving, low, direct, purposeful, cutting straight to her without sweeping the walls, told her the person holding it knew exactly where she was and was not hunting. Jae-min came out of the dark. Not the man she had dinner with, not the controlled, composed businessman who chose his words like instruments. This version had blood on the side of his jaw, his jacket gone, his shirt torn at the shoulder, and he moved through the space between them with a speed and directness that dismantled any remaining version of him she'd constructed based on restraint and precision. He went straight to her hands. She felt him assess the zip ties with his fingers, in the dark, a 2-second evaluation, and then he was cutting, a blade she hadn't seen, and the pressure on her wrists released. "Can you stand?" he said. His voice was rough, breathing hard. "Yes." She stood, her legs held. "Han Seok-won. I know where he is. He knew you were coming. This whole thing is, I know." He took her arm, not gripping, steadying, the same distinction she'd noticed the first night. "We need to move. He has 12 men in here, 4 outside." He looked at her in the flashlight's reflected glow. Something moved across his face that she couldn't fully read in the dark, and the adrenaline. "You counted." "I was listening." "Had 16, he said. "We've cleared 9. She processed that arithmetic. "You brought enough to clear 9 before you got to me." "I brought everyone." He said it the same way he'd said everything else, the same controlled delivery, but something in the word. Everyone told her that had been a significant expenditure, that everyone was not a number he committed lightly. They moved. He kept her slightly behind him, not in front, not dragged, positioned, the way a person positions another when they have thought carefully about lines of fire and don't want to be explanatory about it. They made the door to the right in 20 feet. Beyond it was a corridor, concrete block walls, 2 more of Jae-min's men visible at the far end. One of them had blood on his sleeve. Both of them straightened when they saw Jae-min, a quick visual check, then fell into position. Behind them, somewhere back in the warehouse's dark interior, Han Seok-won's voice came through, loud, unhurried, with the acoustics of someone speaking in an open space. "You came faster than I expected. She must be more important than I calculated." Jae-min stopped. Amara felt his arm go still under her hand. "Jae-min," she said quietly, "I hear him. Don't. He's trying to get me to turn back. I know. Don't." His jaw was tight enough that she could see the muscle in it from the side. He was looking at the door they'd come through, not with uncertainty, with calculation. The calculation of a man who wanted to go back into that room and who was measuring what it would cost. "How many do you have left out there?" Han called out. The voice was closer now. He was moving through the warehouse, unhurried. "How many did you spend getting to her? Was it worth the math?" One of Jae-min's men at the end of the corridor said something in Korean, a single tight sentence. Jae-min answered without looking at him. "What did he say?" Amara asked. "He said Seok-won has 3 men left with him." Jae-min's eyes came back to her. "And that if I go back in, I can end this tonight. Or he can end you tonight. That's the point. That's why he built all of this." She held his eyes in the bad light. Her wrists were burning where the zip ties had been, and her head was pounding, and she was still in a warehouse with armed men on multiple sides, and she was the most clear-headed she'd been since October. "He wants you in that room angry and reactive. He spent 3 months building the situation to produce exactly this moment. Don't give it to him." Jae-min looked at her. The sounds from the warehouse had shifted. Movement, repositioning, the quiet tactical sounds of men finding new angles. "He'll rebuild," Jae-min said. "If I walk out of here tonight, he rebuilds." "Maybe." "Not maybe. Then you deal with him when it's your timing and your ground and you're not running on fear and adrenaline," she said. You told me yourself, reactive men make mistakes. Don't be the reactive man. That's what he needs you to be. Something happened in Jaemin's face. A long moment of visible conflict, the calculation and the rage working against each other. And she watched him move through it with the focus of someone who had spent months learning to read this man through the architecture of his restraint. He turned away from the warehouse door. "Move," he said to his men. They moved. The exit was a fire door at the end of the corridor that opened onto a side alley, and the cold hit her like a wall. January air and the smell of concrete and the sounds of the city at a distance. Ordinary city sounds. Traffic and a train somewhere. The persistent indifference of Seoul to whatever happened in its industrial margins. 2 cars were waiting. Running. She was put in the back of the first one, Jae-min beside her, and the car moved before the door was fully closed. She became aware, only now, that she was shaking. Not the controlled tremor she'd managed in the elevator after the photograph room. Not the carefully contained reaction. This was the full physical account, her body collecting every suppressed response from the past several hours and presenting them all at once. Her teeth wanted to chatter. She locked her jaw. Jae-min looked at her. Then he took off his jacket, torn, blood-stained at one cuff, and put it over her shoulders without asking. She wanted to reject it on principle. She pulled it tighter. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "My wrists. And a headache from whatever they used." She looked at her wrists in her lap. The marks were livid in the dark, the skin abraded and red. "You're bleeding." He touched the side of his jaw without looking. "I know. Let me look at it." "Later." "Jae-min, later." He turned his head to look out the window. The city moved past. "Are you going to be all right?" It was such an insufficient question for such an insufficient moment that she almost laughed. What she said was, "I don't know yet. Ask me when we're somewhere with better lighting." He nodded, once, turned back to the window. For 3 minutes, neither of them spoke. The car moved through the industrial corridor and back toward the lit density of the city, and somewhere behind them, in the dark warehouse, Han Seok-won had 3 men and a plan that hadn't produced the outcome he'd calculated, which meant he would recalculate. Amara knew that. She understood it in the same part of her that had counted footsteps and measured distances from a zip-tied chair. Han Seok-won did not build 3 years of patient infrastructure to abandon it because one extraction went wrong. This was not over. And then Jae-min's phone lit up on the seat between them, and the man in the passenger seat turned and said something rapid and low in Korean, and Jae-min's entire body changed. The stillness became something else, became the specific quality of a man receiving information he'd been afraid was coming. He looked at the phone, looked up, found her eyes in the dark of the car. "He has Park Sung-il's daughter," he said. The 3 words landed with the weight of something that reordered everything that had come before it. Not a recalculation, an escalation. Han Seok-won, denied the outcome he'd wanted from Amara's abduction, had moved immediately to his secondary position. The 6-year-old girl whose father had not died because of the work Amara had done on an October night in a Seoul emergency room. The car was still moving. Jae-min's face in the passing city light was a thing she would remember for a long time afterward. Not rage, not calculation, but the specific, terrible expression of a man who has just been handed a choice that has no version with a good outcome, and who has to make it anyway. The car stopped moving. Not at a destination, Jae-min said one word to the driver, and the car simply pulled to the curb on a street that was nobody's destination, a stretch of road between the industrial corridor and the city proper, lit by a single street lamp that turned everything the color of old bone. He needed 30 seconds to think. She could see that. She gave them to him. Park Sung-il was already on the phone, voice-controlled but only barely, giving location information in rapid bursts. The daughter's name was Soo Yeon. She was 6. She had been taken from her grandmother's apartment in Mappo sometime in the past 2 hours, which meant Han Seok-won had deployed this arm of the operation before Jae-min's team had even breached the warehouse. It had not been a response to the rescue. It had been a simultaneous move. 2 targets, 2 locations, the warehouse and the grandmother's apartment, executed in parallel. Han had not miscalculated. He had planned for the rescue. Amara watched Jae-min absorb this, watched him arrive at the same conclusion she had, that everything that had just happened, the warehouse, the extraction, the moment of apparent escape, had been the first half of a two-part mechanism. They had not foiled Han Seok-won's plan. They had completed the first phase of it. "Where is she now?" Jae-min asked. He was looking at the phone. His voice had gone to a place beyond composure. Below it, some subterranean register that had no affect left in it. Because affect required energy, he was no longer spending on presentation. Park Sung-il said something. Jae-min closed his eyes for 2 seconds, opened them. "He sent a location," Jae-min said. To her, not the driver, not his man in the passenger seat. To her specifically, which she understood was not an accident. "He sent it the moment we left the warehouse. He was watching the warehouse. He had eyes on the exit. He knew when we walked out." His jaw worked. "The location he sent is a building in Seoul, residential, largely vacant, scheduled for demolition." He looked at the phone in his hand with the expression of a man looking at something he knows is a trap and has to walk into anyway. "He wants me to come alone." "You can't go alone. I know that." He knows you know that, which means the alone condition is not the actual demand. It's a lever. He doesn't care whether you bring people. He cares whether you come at all. She was working through it the way she worked through a deteriorating patient, fast, systematic, following the logic where it led, regardless of whether she liked the destination. If you come with people, he harms the child to demonstrate that your people don't change his calculus. If you don't come, same outcome. The only variable he's actually controlling for is whether you show up. Jae-min looked at her. "He wants the confrontation," she said. "He's wanted it since the beginning. Not your death, not initially. He wants to stand in front of you and tell you what you cost him. The child is the thing that makes that conversation happen on his terms." "Yes," Jae-min said. "So we give him the conversation." Silence in the car. "Amara, I go with you." "No. I go with you because I am the other half of his leverage, and if you arrive without me, he will know immediately that I'm being held somewhere protected, which tells him your formation and removes his interest in talking before he acts." She held his eyes. "I am not a civilian in this anymore. I stopped being a civilian the night in the warehouse. If I sit in a safe house while you walk into that building, the only person who knows his behavioral patterns from direct conversation tonight is sitting in a safe house. That is not useful. You are not a weapon I deploy. I'm not asking you to deploy me. I'm asking you to take me with you because it is tactically more sound than leaving me behind, and because I have the right to be in the room where my own fate is being decided." She held the eye contact and did not let it waver. "I am not Park Sung-il's daughter. I am a grown woman who has been managed and maneuvered and protected without my consent for 4 months, and I am telling you clearly what I want to do. You can either respect that, or you can prove Han Seok-won's point about what I am to you." The last sentence landed hard. She saw it land. She had meant it to. Jae-min looked at her for a long time. "You stay behind me," he said. "Agreed. If I tell you to move, you move. No argument, no delay. Agreed. And after this?" He stopped. Something crossed his face that was not the right moment, and he seemed to know it, seemed to file it for the version of this conversation that happened in a world where they got to have it. "Agreed," he said instead, to his own unfinished sentence. He told the driver the address. The building in Seoul had the specific desolation of things the city had moved past. 7 stories, the windows on the lower floors boarded, a demolition notice pasted to the main entrance that had been there long enough to peel at the corners. The street around it was quiet in the way of streets where the residential population had already been relocated. Not empty, exactly, but hollow, the city's ambient noise absent in a way that made the remaining sounds oversized. They came in 2 cars, 6 men total, plus Jae-min and Amara. He had called in the coordinates to 4 additional teams that would position outside the building, but not enter. A perimeter rather than a second assault force. Insurance against exits rather than a rescue attempt that would give Han Seok-won exactly the chaos he could use against a child. The main entrance had been unlocked, deliberately, an invitation that was also a statement. The lobby smelled like concrete dust and standing water. The elevator was non-functional. The stairwell was lit by a battery-powered work light on each landing, which told her someone had been here recently enough to set them up, and the work lights threw shadows that moved wrong, that made the stairwell walls seem to breathe. Jae-min went up the stairs with two of his men ahead and two behind, Amara between them, and she focused on the sound of her own footsteps, kept them even, kept her breathing even, used the rhythm of the climb to hold herself inside the present moment rather than the multitude of bad futures her mind wanted to draft. Third floor. Fourth. The work light on the fifth landing was brighter than the others, the stairwell opening onto a corridor that had been partially cleared. Debris moved to the walls, a path made through it. Another invitation. The path led to a single door at the corridor's end, light visible in the gap beneath it. One of Jae-min's men moved ahead to the door, checked it, looked back and nodded. Jae-min pushed the door open. The room had been an apartment. The interior walls had been partially demolished as part of the building's preparation for demolition, opening two former rooms into a single space. What remained of the walls still had wallpaper, a faded pattern, blue flowers going gray, incongruously domestic. The floors were raw concrete where the flooring had been stripped. Han Seok-wan was standing at the far end of the room near what had been a window, the boards across it allowing thin lines of city light to fall across the floor in pale bars. He was not alone. Two men flanked him, and a third stood to the side near what had once been a closet, now a door-sized gap in the wall. And Su-yeon. She was sitting on the floor near the gap in the wall, her knees pulled to her chest, and she was small in the way that children are small when you have been thinking of them abstractly and then see them in person. 6 years old and wearing a school uniform jacket, which meant she had been taken directly from a handoff somewhere in the city's ordinary evening logistics. Her face was dry. She was not crying. She was doing the thing that children do when they have cried themselves empty and arrived at a stillness that was not calm, but its own kind of survival. Her eyes went to the door when they entered and tracked immediately to the faces, looking for her father. Amara felt something in her chest respond to that searching look in a way she didn't have language for. She held still and let herself feel it, because it was important to feel it, because if she lost access to that response, she would be operating on pure mechanics, and she needed the human part of herself functioning to do what she understood might need to be done in the next few minutes. "You brought her," Han said. He was looking at Amara. His voice had the same flat quality she remembered from the warehouse, the compressed emotion beyond its own heat. "I told you to come alone." "You told me a condition you knew I wouldn't honor," Jae-min said. "Let the child go. When we're finished." "She has nothing to do with this. She never did." "No," Han said. "She has everything to do with this. She is the reason your man Park Sung-il is alive. Which means she is the living evidence of the chain of cause and consequence that leads back to the choice you made in 2021. He turned the statement like a blade. "You didn't kill me. You used my people to do it for you, and then you accepted a false confirmation because it was convenient, because it meant you didn't have to see it done." His eyes moved. "That cost you 3 years. That cost me 3 years. And now we're in a building that is going to be rubble in 6 weeks, and your man's daughter is sitting on the floor, and the woman you've been watching through her kitchen window for 3 months is standing behind you, and I want you to feel every thread of how we got here." The room was very quiet. "I feel it," Jae-min said. Something in Han Seok-won's face shifted at the absence of argument. He had expected deflection, perhaps, or counter-accusation, or the particular coldness of a man who did not acknowledge emotional debts. "You destroyed my organization," Jae-min said. "What you built on top of it after. Not the original. The version you rebuilt in 3 years in the dark. The version that followed this woman, that left notes at her hospital, that put a man in the dark outside her apartment for 3 months. His voice was even, and it cost him something that Amara could see it cost him. The evenness, the deliberate withholding of the heat that was clearly present. "You want me to account for what I did in 2021. I'll give you that. I used your people against you, and I accepted a false report because I was done, and I wanted it over, and that was a failure of completeness, of rigor. I should have verified. I didn't." A pause. "But what you've done in 3 years to reconstruct the means to reach someone who had nothing to do with any of it is not a settling of accounts. That is something else. And you know it." Han Seok-won was quiet. Then, "Let me see you afraid." It came out of him with a rawness that broke the surface of the control, that finally had heat in it, and Amara understood in that moment that this was the actual demand. Not an exchange, not a negotiation, The evidence that Kang Jae-min could be reduced to fear. The proof that he was human enough to break. Jae-min said nothing. Han looked at Amara. "He watches you through your window," he said to her. "He keeps photographs of your life in his office. He is a man who has been conducting a private obsession for 3 months and calling it protection. Does that not frighten you? Does it not make you wonder what the difference is between him and the man I sent to stand outside your building?" Amara looked at Han Seok-wan for a long moment. "It frightened me," she said. "It still does. I haven't resolved that." She held his gaze. "But what you're doing right now is using a 6-year-old child and 4 months of my life and whatever legitimate grievance you have against this man to try to create a moment, a scene, the scene where he breaks. And I don't think it's because you need to see him afraid. I think it's because if he breaks, it means what he did to you mattered enough to break someone. And if it mattered that much, then everything you gave up and everything you've done for 3 years to get to this building was proportionate to the wound." She paused. "But it doesn't work that way. His fear doesn't give you back the 3 years. It doesn't reconstruct what you lost. And you know that. You have known it since before tonight, which is why the flowers and the notes were never going to be enough. There was never going to be a version of this that gave you what you actually want." The room sat with that. Han Seok-wan's expression had done something she couldn't fully read in the bad light. Something that was not softening, nothing so simple, but a kind of involuntary acknowledgement. The face of a man who has heard an accurate thing and cannot deny it, and hates the person who said it for that reason. His hand moved. The man beside the gap in the wall moved at the same time, toward Soo-yeon, and everything that had been still became simultaneous and immediate. Jae-min's men reacting, the 2 men flanking Han coming forward, and Amara did not think. She crossed the room, not toward Jae-min's position, not behind cover, toward Soo-yeon, 15 feet of open floor between them, and she covered it in 3 seconds, going to her knees on the concrete beside the child, putting herself between Soo-yeon and the man reaching for her, and she looked up at the man reaching for the child with the same expression she used in the emergency room when someone needed to understand that she was not moving. "Don't," she said. The man stopped. Not because of her, because Jae-min's voice had cut across the room with a single word in Korean that functioned like a physical command, that froze the room at its joints. Han Seok-wan looked at Amara on the floor with the child behind her. Something in him went out. She saw it. Not surrender, not defeat exactly, but the specific deflation of a man who has arrived at the end of a long effort and found that the end is not what the effort was supposed to produce. 3 years of reconstruction. 3 months of orchestrated menace. And the obstacle between him and his culminating scene was a woman from Atlanta on her knees on a concrete floor in a building scheduled for demolition, with her arms out to either side of a 6-year-old she'd never met. Han Seok-wan lowered his hand. "I'm tired," he said. He said it to no one specifically, or to the room, or to the 3 years that had produced this room. "I'm very tired." "I know," Jae-min said, and something in his voice that had not been there before the warehouse, something that had been there in the dinner, in the restaurant with the brick walls and the candle, was there now. "I know you are." The 2 flanking men looked at Han. Han did not give them an instruction. That absence was its own instruction. Jae-min said something to his men in Korean, and they moved, not violently, not with the assault efficiency of the warehouse, but with the steady, purposeful movement of people doing a job that they understood was now in its resolution phase. The 2 flanking men were disarmed. The third, near Soo-yeon, was moved back and away. Amara stayed on the floor with Soo-yeon and turned to look at the child directly. Soo-yeon was looking at her with the particular concentrated attention of a child assessing an unknown adult for trustworthiness. Dark eyes. A cut on her chin that was superficial, already dried, which Amara reached out and touched very lightly with her thumb, the way she touched things she was evaluating clinically, then redirected her hand to brush the child's hair back from her face with a gentleness that was not clinical at all. "Your father is coming," Amara said. "He's going to be here very fast. Are you hurt anywhere else?" Soo-yeon shook her head. Then, after a moment, in careful English, "Are you a doctor?" "A nurse. Almost the same. My father says nurses work harder than doctors." Something cracked in Amara's chest, very quietly, in a place she hadn't known was vulnerable until this moment. "Your father is right," she said. Park Sung-il arrived 11 minutes later. He came up the stairs at a speed that a man with a shoulder that had been reconstructed 8 months ago should not have been able to sustain, and when he came through the door and saw Su-yeon, he made a sound that was not a word, was something prior to language, and he crossed the room and went to his knees and put his arms around his daughter and held her with the shaking, graceless ferocity of someone who had been doing the math on worst-case scenarios for the past 2 hours. Amara stood and stepped back. She became aware, standing there in the demolished apartment with the city light coming through the boards in pale lines, that her legs were exhausted in a deep structural way, the kind of tired that had been accumulating for 4 months and had finally reached a point where her body was beginning to present the bill. Her wrists ached. The headache had settled into a permanent companion behind her left eye. She was wearing Jae-min's blood-stained jacket over her own coat, and she had been in this jacket for 2 hours, and it had become part of the texture of the night in a way she didn't examine. Han Seok-won was seated against the far wall. One of Jae-min's men was with him. He was not restrained, or he was by something that was not physical, by the specific deflation she had watched happen in him when she'd crossed the room to the child. He was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has reached the end of a very long road and found that the road did not lead anywhere he recognized. Jae-min came to stand beside her. They stood together looking at Park Sung-il and his daughter on the floor of the ruined apartment, the child with her face pressed to her father's shoulder, both of them very still. "What happens to him?" Amara asked. She didn't look at Jae-min. Han Seok-won. "Yes." A pause. "There are people he has been building toward with the organization he reconstructed. People in positions that were leveraged, obligations created. He'll give us the information, and those threads will be cut." He said it the way he said operational things, with the flat practicality of someone describing logistics. After that, he goes somewhere he can't rebuild from. "Is he alive at the end of that sentence?" Jae-min was quiet for 2 beats. "Yes." She turned to look at him. He was looking at Han Seok-won across the room. "He's been living with this for 3 years, Jae-min said. "What he built to get here, I know what that costs. I know what it does to the inside of a person to spend that many years in that kind of tunnel." Something moved across his face that was not mercy and not sympathy, and was something more complicated than either. He had a legitimate grievance buried under 3 years of very bad choices. I'm not going to pretend the first part isn't true, because the second part exists. Amara looked at him for a moment. "That's a complicated thing to think about someone who kidnapped me and held a 6-year-old in a condemned building." "Yes," Jae-min agreed. "It is." She turned back to the room. "Can we leave?" "Yes." They went down the stairs and out through the lobby into the cold. The perimeter teams were visible now that the operation had resolved. Men standing at the intersections and the building's side exits with the particular loose vigilance of people whose tension level had dropped 2 rungs but had not fully descended. The 2 cars were still at the curb. Amara stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building for a moment. 7 stories of pre-demolition vacancy, lit from inside now by flashlights and the battery work lights, the shadows of people moving across the boards on the lower windows. She thought about the 6 weeks until demolition. She thought about the wallpaper with the faded blue flowers. She got in the car. The hospital was Jae-min's suggestion, and she was too tired to argue. Not Seoul General, a private clinic in Gangnam that she gathered was connected to his organization in some operational capacity, staffed at midnight, which meant it was staffed for exactly the kind of people who showed up at midnight having come from the kinds of situations she had come from. A doctor she didn't know cleaned the abrasions on her wrists and checked her pupils and asked about the chemical exposure in a careful, professional way. She answered all his questions accurately and without elaboration. He gave her something for the headache that she accepted, and the cut on Jae-min's jaw required 3 stitches, which Jae-min sat for with the rigid stillness of a man who considered the discomfort of stitches to be beneath acknowledgement. She watched him get the stitches from a chair across the exam room. "You should have let me look at that in the car," she said. "You were in shock." "I was not in shock, I was cold and tired. You were shaking. That's a physiological response to adrenaline withdrawal, not shock." He looked at her sideways while the doctor worked. "You know what I meant." "I know what you meant. I'm telling you the clinical distinction matters." Something happened at the edge of his mouth, the ghost of the concept of a smile. She'd seen it before. She looked away. It was 3 in the morning when they were done. The clinic had a waiting area outside the exam rooms, and Amara sat in it in a chair against the wall with a cup of tea someone had brought her and did not drink. And Jae-min sat across from her with 3 new stitches on his jaw and dried blood on his collar, and the particular stillness that was his baseline, but had a different quality now, something that was not simply composure, but something closer to rest. They were alone. His men were outside. The clinic was quiet. "I need to say something," he said. "Okay?" "The room in my office." He looked at his hands in his lap. She had never seen him look at his hands before. He was always looking at the room, the exits, her face, the position of people relative to each other. The hands were a new thing. "I have been trying to determine since the moment you found it whether there is a version of an explanation that is honest and doesn't sound like a man defending the indefensible. Have you found one?" "No." He looked up. "So I'm going to give you the honest version without the defense attached. I started having you watched for legitimate reasons. Those reasons were real and the threat was real, and everything I told you at the restaurant was accurate." A pause. "And somewhere in the process of watching over you, I began not watching over you, watching you. And I knew the difference, and I continued anyway. And I told myself a story about what I was doing that I have to acknowledge was a story I told because the truth was something I did not have a good framework for. The clinic's climate system ran somewhere in the walls. Outside, a car passed on the street. "What's the truth?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, assembling. The way he assembled things, with the care of someone who had learned that imprecise language created consequences. "I spent a long time becoming someone that other people did not look at directly," he said. "Not out of fear exactly. It was more that people adjusted their behavior around me the way you adjust around something with a known center of gravity. They calculated my position and arranged themselves accordingly. I stopped expecting to be seen as anything other than a fixed point that other things oriented around." He stopped. Started again. "You saved Park Sung-il without looking at him and adjusting your behavior. You just worked. You talked to him. You told him he was going to be fine, and you meant it while you were working to make sure it was true." A pause. "I had people watch you afterward because I wanted to understand what kind of person did that. And then I kept the photographs because I wasn't finished understanding." Amara held the teacup and looked at him. "That is not a healthy thing," she said. "No, it isn't. It is, in fact, the kind of behavior that causes harm regardless of the intention behind it." "Yes." "And knowing that I would be frightened by it, knowing what I was already experiencing from Han Seok-won's man, you continued anyway." He didn't flinch from that. He received it the way he received hard things, directly, without deflection. "Yes." She nodded once. "Thank you for saying it plainly," she said. "Both the honesty and the fact that you're not asking me to accept it." "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I don't think I'm in a position to ask you for anything." She set the teacup down on the small table beside her chair. They sat in the quiet of the clinic for a while. "My mother called me last week," she said. "She wanted to know if I was renewing my contract with the hospital." She looked at the middle distance, the abstract space between his chair and hers. "My transfer was 2 years. The renewal is optional. I hadn't decided." He said nothing. He had gone very still. "I've been in Seoul for 2 years," she said, "and for the past 4 months I've been afraid to walk to the subway, afraid to check my windows, afraid of what was going to be in the mailroom and who was going to be outside the door." She paused. "And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I had dinner in a restaurant with brick walls with the most complicated man I've ever met and talked about my life in a way I haven't talked about my life in a long time." Jae-min waited. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. It was not an accusation. It came out almost soft, which surprised her. "I don't know how to hold in one place the man who kept 3 months of photographs and the man who put himself between me and 12 armed people tonight. I don't know which one is the real one." "Both," he said. "I know." A pause. "That's the problem." He leaned forward slightly in his chair. The 3 stitches on his jaw were dark against his skin in the low light. He looked tired, finally, properly tired. The sustained effort of the night having arrived at his face the way it had already arrived at her legs and her wrists. "I don't know how to be in your world," he said. "I understand that clearly. I understand that what I know how to do is to protect and control and manage the variables of a situation, and that when those instincts are applied to a person, it produces something that is not. It is not what I intended, but it is what it is, regardless of intention. He stopped. What I know is that in the 4 months since the night in Velvet Crown, I have been paying attention to something I stopped believing existed. And I'm aware that saying that to you right now, after everything tonight, is ill-timed. Amara looked at him. Ask me something real, she said. Not a negotiation, not a framing, something you actually want to know. He looked at her for a long moment. Are you going to renew your contract? He said. She almost laughed. The laugh turned into something more unsteady, and she pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment and breathed through it. I don't know, she said. Okay. That's not an answer. It's the only accurate one I have right now. He nodded. He seemed to understand that. Jihi was at Amara's apartment when she got home at 4:30 in the morning. She was sitting outside the door in the hallway with her back against the wall and her legs stretched out and her coat pulled around her, asleep, with her phone face up on her lap, showing 17 missed calls that Amara had not made because she had not had a working moment to make them. She woke when Amara's key hit the lock. You look terrible, Jihi said. I know. Are you hurt? My wrists. Small stuff. I've had worse from bad IV placements. Jihi got up and looked at the wrist she extended, turned it, assessed it with the practiced eye of someone who spent her life reading bodies. Then she pulled Amara into a hug that was sudden enough that Amara didn't have the preparation to hold herself together for it, and she stood in the doorway of her apartment being held by her friend at 4:30 in the morning and felt the entire accumulated weight of 4 months drop through her in a single wave. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry, but she held on. She slept until noon. When she woke, the apartment was full of ordinary daylight, the city visible through her curtains in its winter version, pale and busy, indifferent in the way she had always found Seoul's indifference calming, a city too large and too occupied with itself to keep track of you. Her wrists were bandaged. Ji Hae had done that while she was still half awake in the early hours. The headache was gone. Her body felt like something that had been through a substantial physical event and was in the quiet aftermath of it, the particular flatness of a system that has operated at emergency capacity and now does not know what to do with ordinary demand. She lay in her bed for a while and looked at the ceiling. She thought about Han Seok-wan against the wall of the ruined apartment with his 3 years of patient rage run out to its conclusion and his face doing the thing it had done. That specific deflation, the thing that was not peace, but was the exhaustion that comes after a sustained effort toward an end that cannot deliver what you needed from it. She thought about the wallpaper with the blue flowers. She thought about Park Sung-il's sound when he came through the door. She thought about Jae-min's hands in his lap in the clinic waiting room, looking at them, the first time she had seen him not watching the room. She got up, showered, made coffee. She called her mother in Atlanta. You sound different, her mother said 4 minutes into the call. I'm tired. Not tired. Different. Something happened. Several things happened. I'll tell you some of them eventually. Her mother was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of maternal quiet that meant she was deciding whether to push. She decided not to. Are you safe? Yes, Amara said. And it was true. It was true in a way it hadn't been for 4 months. I think I'm okay. Are you coming home? She sat with that for a moment. Through her kitchen window, the city was doing what it did, dense and complicated and ongoing, layers of it visible from the angle she'd been looking at for 2 years, the building across the way and the street below it, and the lives implied in both. I don't know yet, she said. I'll know soon. 3 days later, she went to his office. Not the building with the secondary room, his primary business address, the glass-walled one with the receptionist, and she told the receptionist she didn't have an appointment and gave her name and waited. He came out himself. He looked like a man who had slept approximately as well as she had in the past 3 days, which was to say, not well, and he had a small neat bandage over the stitches on his jaw, and he was wearing a suit that was impeccable in the way all his suits were impeccable, which she had come to understand was not vanity, but a form of armor. The armor you could see was supposed to make you stop looking for the rest of it. She had stopped being fooled by that a long time ago. Can we walk? She said. They walked. The street outside his building ran along a small park, the winter version of it, the trees bare and the benches mostly empty, a few people moving through with the purposeful pace of people getting somewhere rather than being anywhere in particular. She had prepared what she was going to say. She had drafted it in her head over the past 3 days with the care she applied to things that mattered. She had revised it. In the end, she said something different. "I made a decision," she said, "about the contract renewal." He walked beside her, did not look at her. "I'm going to renew," she said. "That's not about you. That was true before October. I like my work here, and I like the city, and I had not renewed because I was frightened, and I refused to let 4 months of fear make a 2-year decision for me." She paused. "So I'm staying." He nodded once. "And I'm not—" She stopped, restructured. "I'm not ready to forgive the room. I don't know how long that takes, or if forgiving is even the right word for it. I know that I understand the difference between what Han Seok-won's man did and what you did, and I know the difference matters, and I also know that mattering doesn't resolve it." She was looking at the bare trees. "What I know is that I have spent 4 months being afraid and the last 3 days not being afraid, and some of that is because of you, and I can't pretend it isn't." Jae-min stopped walking. She stopped too, turned to look at him. "What I want," she said, "is to try. The thing that is not surveillance and not management and not protection without consent. The thing where I know where your people are and you tell me when there is something I need to know and I am not a variable you optimize around without telling me." She held his eyes. "I don't know if you know how to do that. I'm not certain you do. I'm not certain I do either, given that my most recent extended relationship was with a man who thought emotional availability was an extreme sport." She heard herself and almost smiled. "But I think you want to try. And I think wanting to counts for something." He looked at her on the winter path in the small park on the quiet street in the city they were both in, and something in his face did what it almost never did. It opened. Not wide, not the uncomplicated opening of someone without history. The partial, cautious opening of a door that has been closed a very long time and whose hinges are not yet trusted. "I want to try," he said. "Okay," she said. "The room," he said. "The secondary room. I had everything in it destroyed the morning after you found it." She absorbed that. "Okay. Not because you found it. I would have—" He stopped, started again. "I was going to. I had been—" He looked away. "I knew what it was. I had been telling myself a different story about what it was. The night you found it, the story stopped working." "What story did you tell yourself about it?" He was quiet for a moment. A couple walked past them on the path, oblivious, wrapped in their own weather. "That it was documentation," he said. "That it was the record of a threat I was tracking. That keeping it organized was a form of vigilance." He looked back at her. "The story stopped being believable when I watched you stand in the middle of it. I could see what it was through your eyes. I had not been willing to see it through mine." She nodded slowly. "That's honest," she said. "I'm trying to be." "I know." She started walking again, slowly, and after a beat he fell into step beside her. "That's also the part that's different. You're trying to be. Most men I've known who did things they needed to defend spent a lot of energy defending them. You spent 3 days doing whatever the equivalent of reckoning is for you. It wasn't a pleasant 3 days?" "Good," she said, without heat. "It shouldn't have been." He looked at her, the ghost of the smile again. "No," he agreed. "It shouldn't." The months that followed were not simple. Amara had not expected simple and would not have trusted it if she'd encountered it. The world she had stepped adjacent to on the night in Velvet Crown did not become uncomplicated because the immediate crisis had resolved. Han Seok-won gave up the information that dismantled what remained of his reconstructed network. Not gladly, not in a single conversation, in the grinding, methodical way that things are dismantled when the person holding the information is doing so as the final exercise of control available to them. It took 6 weeks. Jae-min told her when it was done. He told her because she had asked to be told. Park Sung-il's daughter, Soo-yeon, had her cut treated properly at a pediatric clinic the morning after the building in Seoul. She had told her school friends, apparently, that she had been on an adventure, which was the kind of damage control available only to 6-year-olds. Park Sung-il came to Seoul General 2 weeks later to find Amara on her shift break and stood in the corridor and was unable to speak for approximately 45 seconds, which she bore with the patient stillness of someone who understood what it felt like to run out of language for something. "I know," she said, when it was clear he wasn't going to manage words. He nodded. He left. She counted it. Ji-hye, when Amara told her about the developing state of things with Jae-min, was quiet for a longer time than usual. "Are you happy?" Ji-hye asked finally. Amara considered that question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm not frightened," she said. "That's new. That's different from what I had before October." She thought about it more. "And there are moments, specific moments, where I feel something I would call happy if I were pressed for the word. Whether that constitutes happy in the general sense, I'm not entirely sure. That's the most clinical answer to that question I've ever received. I'm a nurse." "You're an impossible woman." "Probably," Amara agreed. "He seems to be okay with that." In April, 6 weeks after the building in Seoul was demolished on schedule, Jae-min suggested Velvet Crown. Not in the way of a man staging a symbolic moment. He was not, she had learned, a man given to obvious symbolism. He suggested it the way he suggested most things, directly, with minimal framing, leaving her space to decline. She didn't decline. The club was exactly what it had been in January, the same golden light and compressed music and the particular density of people who had somewhere to be and had chosen this as the somewhere. She was not afraid walking into it. She noticed the absence of the fear the way you notice the absence of a sound you've been hearing so long it became part of the background texture. Its removal was loud in its own way. They were given a booth rather than standing at the bar. His men were present in the usual way, the usual radius maintained, the usual economy of movement. She had stopped noticing the men, the way she'd stopped flinching at the weight of the bracelet. The bracelet was still on her wrist. She had made that choice explicitly, consciously, about 3 weeks after Seoul, had taken it off, set it on her bathroom counter, and looked at it for the better part of an hour. Had thought about what it represented and what she wanted it to represent, and what the difference was between the two. Had put it back on. Not because he asked her to, because she chose to. He had noticed when she came to his office that day with it back on her wrist. Had looked at it and then at her face and had not said anything. She had not explained. The explanation was in the gesture itself, which was the point of gestures. They sat in the booth with their drinks and the music, and she looked out at the floor where people were moving in the practiced self-consciousness of people doing things for an audience they were also part of. "Do you want to dance?" he asked. She looked at him. "You're asking," she said. I'm asking." She thought about the first time, the specific desperation of it, her drink slipping in her hand, the sideways lurch of her heart, when she'd seen the figure across the room, the calculation she'd made in 4 seconds when she'd turned and found this man and said, "Please dance with me," and he had put his glass down without hesitation. She thought about everything that had lived between that moment and this one. "Yes," she said. On the floor, he put one hand at her back the way he had the first time, and she did not look over her shoulder for the figure in the dark coat, and no one watched them from the edges of the room with a camera phone sending photographs to someone in the shadows. She was just a woman dancing with a man who was still learning how to hold something without gripping it, and she was still learning how to let someone close without watching every door. It was work. It was going to keep being work. She was okay with that. The music moved around them, and the golden lights made everything slightly unreal, the way good light in the right room can make the present moment feel preserved even while it's happening. And she thought, this is what after looks like. Not fixed, not finished, just this. The next moment and the one after it, chosen. She leaned back enough to look at him. "Are you still afraid of me?" he asked. She had thought, during the past months, about what she would say if he asked that. Had turned several answers over, discarded the ones that were too clean. "I was afraid of the man everyone told me you were," she said. She looked at him. "Then I met the man you never showed anyone." He looked back at her. The partial opening she had seen in the park was there again, a little wider now, the hinges a little more trusted. Around them the city went on being a city, enormous and indifferent and full of ordinary lives doing ordinary things in the particular way of a place too large to keep track of any single person for long. Somewhere in Mapo, a little girl in a school uniform jacket was telling her classmates about adventures. Somewhere in a clinic, a doctor was on his 3rd shift and thinking about coffee. Somewhere, the Han River was moving through the city the way it always had, indifferent to everything that happened on its banks. Amara had been frightened for 4 months and was not frightened now, and the person standing across from her on the dance floor had been the cause of some of that fear and the end of the rest of it. And she held both things at once without trying to resolve them into something neater, because she was 34 years old and she had been keeping people alive for long enough to know that the things worth having were almost never the things that were neat. He pulled her slightly closer. She let him. Not because she needed him to hold her up, because she chose him. That was the whole of it, and the whole of it was enough.